comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are presented for the purpose of discussion only. No endorsements by Atlanta Fulton Public Library System or Fulton County government are intended, and none should be presumed. Hi, welcome to Writers in Focus. I'm your host, James Taylor, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest Zoe Fishman. May I call you Zoe?
You may call me Zoe.
Zoe.
Yes.
I'd like to welcome you to the Atlanta Fulton Public Library and the Fulton County Government Center.
Thank you.
Zoe.
Thank you very much for having me.
By way of introduction, you're the author of a book that we'll soon be discussing called Saving Ruth. You are the author of a previous novel called Balancing Acts. You were raised in Alabama. You went up north to, what am I saying this for? You went up north to Boston University, studied for a while, worked for 13 years in the New York City publishing business, always wanted to be a writer, and you've succeeded admirably to such a point that when I saw a blurb in the AJC a couple of months ago, I said, I need to interview this author. You're looking at an elderly white man that has nothing to do with the events of your book. And I was fascinated. It's a page turner. And I'm saying to myself, if I can read a book like this, anybody can. So welcome to this show.
Thank you so much.
It's incredibly well written. I'd like you to do most of the talking. I don't want to give the plot away too much, but the book is character driven. So can we talk about Saving Ruth? Who's Ruth?
Ruth is me.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, that's one of the pleasures of writing.
Okay.
It can be a very self-indulgent process. But Ruth is me at 19.
Okay. Ruth, I'm going to give away a little bit, okay?
Okay.
Ruth has left her home, a Jewish home, somewhere near Mobile in Alabama. She has been a freshman at University of Michigan, basically her first time out of the South. So she comes back, and it's not that all hell breaks loose, is that she's trying to reconstruct what was once her good life. Do I have that right?
Yeah, she's trying to refigure who she is with the new knowledge that she has. She's on the cusp of figuring out what kind of woman she wants to be, and being away at college has taught her a lot, for better and for worse. And so she comes home and is expected to be the same Ruth she was when she left, and she's not by any means.
Her brother David, who she still idolizes, going to Mercer University, a soccer star. And when I was going to school, he'd be the kind of guy that I hated because he was good looking, he was athletic, he was intelligent, he could just open his mouth and girls would swoon.
Right.
And some of the boys would swoon too, if you know what I mean. But he's changed. And do you want to talk about this?
Sure.
Okay.
He was all those things and also very close with their parents in a way that Ruth never was. Ruth was kind of seen as the endearing screw-up. She did okay, but she didn't excel at anything. Mostly, I think, because of her own insecurities. She kind of hid behind them and created this persona, sarcastic, didn't care about anything, when in reality she cared very much. So she comes home, and David returns also, but he's withdrawn and distant and not speaking to her parents. And he, throughout the year, hasn't spoken to Ruth at all. So she's coming back as this new human, and he hasn't had any input, or he has no idea that she's going to return like this. So they're both strangers to each other.
Okay, I'm going to tread on some personal territory right now, okay? I speak this from experience. It's like there's an old movie with Brett Reynolds in it, and he's dying of cancer. And everybody says to the character in the movie, you look great, because he's lost so much weight. And that's happening to Ruth. But Ruth is not dying of cancer.
No.
She has an eating disorder. And so would you talk about that for a minute? Because even her family says, you look great, but you're sick.
Right. It's a very strange...
It's a strange
thing. When you are, a high school girl, looks are everything. And if you happen to be a Jewish girl with dark curly hair, a Zoftig physique, and you're surrounded by blonde Baptist cheerleaders, you're going to feel a little bit different. And I think that's what Ruth felt her whole life. And in order to mask those insecurities, she became the funny one. So she goes away to college and, for whatever reason, being away from home, she just starts experimenting with what she's eating. Let's give it a shot. And lo and behold, the weight starts to come off. And she is, all of a sudden, boys are attracted to her in a way they never were. And that becomes very seductive. And so, 2 meals a day comes down to 1 meal a day, comes down to eating Swedish fish and pretzels, and that's basically what she survives on. So when she returns home, she's 35 pounds thinner and
35 pounds?
looks like a different person. I mean, there are bones in her face, and she carries herself well, and she's met with praise everywhere she goes, from women too, because, even though they would think to themselves something's wrong, she still now epitomizes what society tells us is beauty.
We've talked about Ruth. We've talked about her brother. We've talked about the father who's a lawyer, Sam. Marjorie, we haven't talked about, but she's the mother, the very caring mother, who was once very beautiful herself, I gather. Let's use a fancy expression, the mise en scène. Where is this? What part of Alabama? What upper middle class?
This is upper middle class.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But, she comes from, it's a very middle class household in the values that her parents have instilled in her and her brother. You work hard, education is extremely important, and hopefully, her parents are both from New York, so their dream is to get her out. They realize that she is kind of a stranger here in a strange land.
Now I'm going to ask you the tough questions, okay? The book reads as if it were written effortlessly. I cannot tell you how wonderful an experience is for me as a reader to just turn the page and you're a gifted writer. This book ostensibly is about a 19-year-old white girl in Alabama. It's a paperback. It's being marketed as a beach read. What are your thoughts about that? When you started writing this book, were you writing another fancy word like a Bildungsroman in German, like a coming-of-age story, or were you writing a young adult romance? You know how these, I'm a librarian, you come from a publishing background. Right. We use these expressions. So were you consciously...
I was writing, primarily this book was about a brother and a sister, because I'm a huge reader. I've always been a giant book nerd, and I had yet to come across a story about a brother and a sister that felt real to me, that I connected with. So that was my first. And then from that point on, I worked at a swim club in the summer, and that always, even as I was working there, I thought, I have to put this into a book someday. It's such a succinct feeling to work there during the summer, the kids, the splashing, the smell of suntan lotion. It just was
the candy, the sodas.
It's a very
the thunderstorm coming in.
A very special place. And even as I was there, I was very cognizant of the fact that I was lucky that this was my job. So as I was writing it, it was my hope that I was going to transcend the chick lit women's fiction, lower women's fiction bar. And in some ways I think that I did, but I also knew, because I was in publishing for so long, that if I wanted this book to sell, we were going to have to play it down. And that's just the way it is. I mean, this book in hardcover would not sell. I'm not a well enough known author. People are not going to pay $30 for a hardcover of mine yet. Maybe one day, but not now.
Emily Giffen, I interviewed her about 10 years ago. She started out the same way with something blue, it was a paperback, and now they're making movies and stuff like that.
Right. And I do believe that the careers that are a slow build are the ones that can stand the test of time. As much as I would love to have been, the Hunger Games lady, it's just, I hope she can sustain it, and I'm sure she will with the movies and all of that. But to me, I was an agent also, so I represented authors, and I always told them, if each book is better than the last, then you're on the right path, if you want to sustain a career.
Well, I told you that before the interview, Zoe, that I had taught a course in how to get your manuscript published, and everybody wants to know how do you get an agent. I would say that sometimes the actual writing of your book will be the easiest part of the enterprise. It's marketing, getting people to read it is the hard part. How did you go about this? I mean, as you wrote this as an insider then. Wow.
Well,
I didn't know that. All right, all right.
okay,
all
my
right.
story is actually very interesting. Well, sort of
Fire
interesting.
away, fire away.
I started in book publishing. My very first job was the assistant to the audio publisher of Random House. First job out of the gate, 22 years
Wow.
old.
English major,
English
Boston
major,
University.
exactly.
Good job.
Yeah, so I took the NYU publishing program,
Excellent.
which was a 6-week program. So I started there, and that was right before Bertelsmann came in. And
Oh, yeah.
So then I moved to editorial. Then I got bored of publishing and left and wrote copy for some websites for a while, and then returned in foreign rights at Simon & Schuster, which I am so grateful for. That was such a great job for me. It took me out of creative and into business and strategy, and from there I went on to agenting. So throughout all of this, I met many, many editors, and I really wasn't writing because I was being lazy, but I always wanted to. And I had a friend who was a very successful writer, very driven, and I just kept, circling her. And one day she had a project she just couldn't take on, and it fell in my lap. And it was, I don't know if you know the Bratz.
No, I don't.
The Bratz are pretty much hoochie Barbie dolls.
Okay.
And they had a mystery series. So I wrote 2 of those mystery books, which was incredibly hard. I am a complete character dialogue writer. Plot for me was a mystery. And through writing a mystery, I think that's the hardest plot to actually conceive. I learned a lot. So I wrote 2 of those. Ended up meeting another editor at a conference. We're talking about it. She goes back 6 months later. They're in a group meeting at HarperCollins. They're saying, what's popular now? Let's brainstorm.
Yeah.
Oh, women in a yoga class. That sounds good.
Okay.
And my friend said, oh, I know someone who we might want to give a shot at this. She called me. I submitted a draft. They liked it. I submitted 5 chapters. They liked it. And I got a deal. And I was my own agent for that book.
I always ask this question, and it's something that I know you're familiar with, but when you read a good book, the idea is that the reader is not really aware of what the author is doing. Like when I finished your book, everything came together. There were smiles on faces. I don't want to give too much away, but it gave me a very satisfied feeling like, yeah, I read this book and I learned something. This is a good read. And then I realized that when I'm preparing for the interview that, you did this way, you did this that way. Could you tell the audience that writing is incredibly difficult?
Writing is incredibly difficult. It's not so much that the writing itself is difficult.
Okay.
If I'm writing about a character that I like, I can go on and on. Plotting is difficult. It's dropping subtle cues in chapters that don't slap the reader in the face, that when you're done, hopefully the reader says, oh, and they connect.
Can we talk about one giant incident in the book that does slap the reader in the face, but it drives the characters? Okay, I'll set it up for you, and you can finish.
Okay.
So Ruth is at the pool with her brother, and unbeknownst to anybody, a caravan of young kids comes in, and they've paid for the privilege. This is a pool where you pay for the privilege. And unbeknownst to anybody, the kids are running around, and one of them almost drowns. You take it from there.
So
it's a beautiful scene.
Thank you very much. So as it's happening, the brother is on the lifeguard stand manning the pool, and Ruth is in the snack bar, which is the way it worked. You'd be up, the other person would be serving crap to kids all day long at a hiked up price.
Yeah.
And it's funny that the rest of the climax was always what I started from in this book. I knew that that's what I wanted to do. The rest was kind of a circle around it. But as he's on the stand, Ruth is helping one of the younger swimmers with the butterfly, which is sort of a complicated stroke on deck. And she looks out and she sees in her brother's blind spot the girl's hair is in braids, and one of the braid is going under the water. And so in that moment, which I never experienced firsthand as a lifeguard, it's kind of like all systems go, you see red, and she just dives into the pool, and as she's swimming underwater and bodies are moving out of the way, she's thinking about saving this girl, and she says, I like this moment with her. She says to God as she pulls the girl out, please, if you could just save her, if she doesn't die, I promise I'll get my eating stuff together. I promise I'll be nicer to my parents. So I really liked the way they kind of set her up. You saw all those vulnerabilities, and you saw how aware she was that she was in trouble.
Yeah.
And then through the blessing of being able to save the girl, her life changes.
And it's basically a white pool, and the little girl who almost drowns is African American.
Correct.
So when I got to that point, I'm going, because as an author, you could have gone overboard on that.
Yeah.
Could this be bringing that racial element? Ruth's father is a lawyer. He even warns her, "Don't be careful what you say. There's a lawsuit here. They're going to sue the pool and everything." It was brilliantly done.
Thank you very much. I grew up in Alabama, and racism was everywhere. It wasn't always in your face. And that's not to say that Alabama is the only place that racism exists. It's everywhere. It was in New York. But I think that I always wanted to write about that because at my pool, too, we would have African-American swimmers. And it was never, there was always a whisper, and it pained me. And I wanted to write about people coming together as people and kind of rising above.
Some of your reviewers, and you've gotten great reviews from Publishers Weekly, from Booklist, from New York Magazine, from the Atlanta Jewish Times, from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, have all pointed out that you address big themes. But for me, this reader sees the themes as more or less undercurrents of the characters.
That was my goal.
Yeah.
I didn't want to smack anybody in the face.
Like, you're getting me excited now about the book because it's like it's suddenly coming back in waves. Here's Ruth coming back for the first time from Michigan. She's seeing her old town in a new light. She's seeing, wait a second, and she said, I'm Jewish. And are people looking at me the wrong way because I'm Jewish? Or the way Jewish people in the South have always aligned themselves one way or another with African Americans, and that tenuous relationship that's been broken and rebuilt over the years, that's in the book too.
Well, that's something that I encountered many times. I mean, we, as two ethnicities, we absolutely don't have the same experience. But being minorities in a place that is so homogenous brings you together in some way. I think some of my favorite moments were Ruth's conversations with David about what it meant to be Jewish and what it might mean to be African American, and were we just as feared as African Americans were? It was just quieter. And I was scared writing those scenes. You can go wrong very easily. You can offend a million people, and maybe rightfully so. But my goal was always, it was to write about a girl who was figuring out the kind of person she wanted to be. And by doing that in a way with some kind of integrity, I wanted her to explore all the different questions and check herself when she made these kind of grandiose statements that were self-indulgent.
I'm just talking about my interpretation of it now, Zoe, but I don't want to give away the ending, but it seems to me that when Ruth looks into the mirror, as so many 19-year-olds do, they suspect that the world's problems come from their own heart and soul. And she realizes near the end of the book that, wait a second, the whole world is messed up. I don't want to give too much away.
Right. Yeah. And is it up to me to transcend that easy out? How am I going to do this in my own life? How am I going to be the kind of person that I can be proud of? What does that mean? There's
this tiny little scene in the book that I love as a grown-up, okay? Because I'm probably older than your own father, but
I don't know.
So Ruth wakes up in the morning and she's having cereal, so it's something that she can tolerate. And she looks at her father has an office in the house, and you don't go into a great deal about that, but a lot of lawyers have an office in the house. And she notices, and you don't put a lot into this, but the father has spent the night sleeping there. My father's sleeping in the office and not with Mom, huh? Very nicely done, because you as a reader, I've thought about that for like pages go by, and I don't want to give too much away, but nicely done.
Thank you very much.
Can we talk a little bit more about, one more character. Is it Jason, who's at the pool, and he uses some incredibly ugly racial epithets.
No, that is another lifeguard.
Who's that one?
His name is escaping me at the moment.
Okay. But here's Ruth at the pool with her friends. I mean, these people, she grew up with them.
Yeah.
And suddenly she's realizing that some of them are horribly racist or using the wrong word at the wrong time.
Right.
Very nicely done. Could we talk about some more about publishing? Why wasn't this book published as a hardback? A lot of people will say, if the book is really good,
That's very kind of you. I think hardback, to me, hardback is literary fiction. I don't think this is. One day I would love to write literary fiction.
Yeah.
I think this kind of skirts the middle ground. And again, I'm a second-time author. My name is not that known. And so this was safe.
Talk about the importance of marketing for a minute. I'm a librarian. I'm sitting at my desk, and I get an email from your publicist just saying that this woman, wonderful writer, I'm going to Ruth Wasserman knows. So I know. Zoe Fishman is in Atlanta, and she is going on a book tour. And I said, well, I'm in Atlanta too. And she kind of arranged this thing. But can you just address the importance of marketing and have someone in your corner?
Oh my goodness, it's everything.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It's everything. I'm so lucky. My publicist is incredible, and she's worked so hard on my behalf. When you're a publicist at a publishing house, you have 1 million titles, you have 1 million authors, you don't get paid a lot, and you're supposed to elevate them to stratospheric heights. It's incredibly important, especially now that Amazon has kind of taken the place of bookstores.
Yeah.
Because at Barnes & Noble, you walk in, there's a table. New noteworthy paperbacks. Amazon is just a blank page. You pick whatever you want, and the only way you know to pick my book is if you've seen it on TV or it's been in a newspaper. Word of mouth is wonderful, and that's the hope and goal.
Yeah.
But by the time word of mouth happens, you're like 8 months down the line and already depressed that your book has sold like 10 copies.
So before the interview, we talked about this. I was on the internet this morning. You can buy your book on Amazon.com for $10.74. If you go to Barnes & Noble or are there any bookstores left? No, I'm just kidding. You can buy it for the list price of $14.99, or you can download it as an ebook to your Nook or Kindle for $9.99. This has all happened in the last year.
Yeah.
Probably since before you even started writing the book.
Well,
Okay.
the popularity
Okay.
of the ebook, absolutely. It's grown by leaps and bounds. People
Has it affected your perception and your plans in further publishing?
It has. I love books. I love the feel of them.
Yeah.
It's a whole process for me. But as long as people are reading, I really don't care where they're reading it. And I think that it's a modern way to read. And in this world that's constantly changing and what's more modern than the next thing, I think it's very important. And publishing houses need to make money. It's not an easy time for them either. So whichever way it works, I'm happy with.
I want to go back to the book one more time, Saving Ruth by Zoe Fishman. I read in one interview that you like to outline. A lot of authors will say, don't outline, don't do this, don't do that. Why did you outline?
Well, outlining
Okay.
is my middle name.
Okay.
I'll outline, how to clean the kitchen.
And you probably make lists too, right?
There's nothing spontaneous about me, which can be a fault. I love the whole process. The outlining for me reminds me, I was an English major, reminds me of writing papers in college. When you have the note cards and you just kind of move them around.
Oh, yeah.
To me, that's the hardest part, but also the most rewarding. I work back from the climax, and in each chapter, like maybe 2 or 3 sentences. And then sometimes new characters will come up, and then I have a character list at the top, and I add them and put a little blurb next to them. So by the time I actually start writing, I know what's happening pretty much all the way to the end. The end always changes. But that way, to me, is the most efficient way to write. I need to be absolutely focused, and a list helps me maintain that focus.
Any feedback from friends of friends who have children who are saying that you've hit the nail on the head about 19-year-old young women?
Yes, and
Okay.
for 19-year-olds themselves, which is the most, amazing to hear that. I was very nervous that this book would sound like a 35-year-old woman writing a 19-year-old, because I know as a 19-year-old I hated that. So to have someone tell me that who's of that age and say, you know what, I'm home for the first summer after college, it feels like this, is incredibly rewarding.
It was, to me, it was like being a scientist looking on, or an anthropologist on Mars looking into a family and saying, 19-year-olds are doing this? Like a bowl of Rice Krispies for breakfast, and then a cigarette and a joint and a beer, and then I'm going to work, and then I'm going swimming in the river and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've been talking to Zoe Fishman. She is the author of Saving Ruth, published by William Morrow. It's available on your Kindle, on your Nook, but please go to a bookstore and buy it, or come to a public library, Atlanta Fulton Public Library, and check it out. You've been a delight to be here, and I wish you all the success in the world.
Thank you so much.
Zoe Fishman,
It's been a
Saving
pleasure.
Ruth. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
And that's it. We just keep on talking.
Okay.
That was fun.
That was
Comments and opinions expressed on Writers in Focus are those of the individual participants and are